This is the story of 3 Armenian Americans from New Jersey who heeded the lure of a sacred mountain in a distant land once inhabited by their ancestors. They wanted to be the first Armenian expedition to climb Ararat, a towering mountain almost 3.5 miles high and of historic importance to the Armenian people. Once, this area was Armenia. Today it is Turkey. At the beginning of the 20th century, most Armenians were killed or driven from their land by the Turks. Few Armenians have dared to return to their native land. The climbers were at first afraid to go on a pilgrimage to a mountain controlled by the Turks. Masis Parsegian owned a hotel in New York State. Gregory, his son, was the general manager. Hamlet Nersesian, an emigre from Soviet Armenia, was a real estate agent in Queens, New York. They were neither sportsmen, nor photographers, nor spies, nor had they ever climbed a mountain. They never thought their quest would involve them with secret police or international smugglers. After the climb, they were arrested by Turkish authorities and placed in solitary confinement. The interrogation was harsh. Their passports and souvenir rocks were confiscated. Fortunately, they had hidden their film. The reason for their arrest is still a mystery. The Turkish authorities probably suspected that the climbers had photographed the site of a deserted Armenian village on the north slope of Mount Ararat, now a security zone on the Russian frontier. Their release was as arbitrary as their arrest. They were afraid that it was a temporary device to trick them to reveal the whereabouts of the film. They left the film behind with a contact and fled from the city of Van. The 3 began a nightmare road trip across Turkey in the hope of reaching safety before they were arrested again. They traveled 18 hours and covered a distance of 700 miles. When they arrived at the airport in Ankara, they saw the same 2 armed policemen who had originally arrested them at the base of the mountain. They were terror-stricken, but they managed to elude the authorities and took the next flight to America. The only mementos which they brought back were some wildflowers and a bronze door knocker from Masis's ancestral home. The climbers waited almost 2 years before they received all their photographs, which were smuggled out in 4 separate packets. These 35mm slides and 8mm films make it possible, finally, to tell the extraordinary story of the first Armenian pilgrimage to the top of the world's most historic mountain, the supposed landing place of Noah's Ark. To the Kurds who live at the base of Mount Ararat, it is the mountain of evil. To the Turks who occupy the territories, it is the mountain of pain. To the Armenians who gaze from afar, Ararat is the mother of the world. To Armenians in distant lands, to Armenians who live in the valley below, to Armenians who died at the foot of the mountain, Ararat remains a sacred symbol of nationhood. Poet Kevork Emin captures the historic bond between a mountain and a people. I am an Armenian as old as Ararat. My shoes were wetted by waters of the flood. Beside these shining peaks where Noah sat, one morning here in Ararat's green valley, my hammer and my pick aside I flung. With trusty shield I met attacking hordes, suffering countless wounds from countless swords. I am an Armenian, as old as Ararat. I hold my head as high as eagles fly. The Armenian name for Ararat is Masis. On the slopes of this mountain, Armenian freedom fighters have defended their homeland. Armenian heroes have left their footprints in the snows of Ararat. Armenian martyrs have hidden in its caves. Yet, over a 3,000-year period, there is no historical record of Armenians ascending this legendary mountain by themselves. Masis Parsegian led the first Armenian expedition to the top of this mountain.
There are many reasons why I wanted to climb Mount Ararat. I can remember as a young boy, my father sitting me down on his lap and describing one of the most magnificent mountains in the world. He came from that area. He saw that mountain almost daily. He described its beauty. He described and told me how many, many people attempted to climb that mountain. Very, very few ever succeeded. He decided, because he loved that mountain so much, and the entire Armenian nation loved that mountain so much, he decided to name me after that mountain. He called me Masis. And then when my first son was born, many years later, I decided to give him his middle name as Masis. And then the dream came to me, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could climb that mountain someday with my son, Gregory Masis.
Mount Ararat is located at the crossroads of the ancient world. It stands high in a small valley near the junction of Asia, Europe, and Africa. For almost 3,000 years, Ararat was located within the boundaries of the kingdoms of Armenia. Today, it remains in Turkey, just across the border from Soviet Armenia. The first mention of Ararat occurs in the Bible. In the book of Genesis, in chapter 8, verse 4, we read that Noah landed in the mountains of Ararat. Over 200 different cultures contain stories of a monumental flood, of a man of God who survived the treacherous waters, and of a mountain that served as the resting place of an ark in a world made new. The story of the flood and the vision of Noah have captured the imagination of many peoples of the world. For centuries, man has tried to determine the location, size, and shape of the ark. Man has sought to recreate the epic events during an early era of life on Earth. Through miniature paintings, monks in remote mountain sanctuaries have glorified Ararat and the story of the Great Flood. According to tradition, it was down the slopes of this lonely mountain that Noah and his family descended to repopulate the earth. Throughout history, there have been reports of sightings of the ark, yet no one has ever located such a structure intact on the top or on the slopes of Mount Ararat. Some claim to have seen parts of the ark within a mile of the Armenian village of Arguri. It was at Arguri on the northern face of Ararat where Noah, according to legend, built his temple and made a sacrifice to God. It was in Arguri where Noah is claimed to have planted a vineyard. In the Armenian language, Arguri means he planted the vine. In 1840, a terrible earthquake shook the mountain. Arguri slipped into the mighty gorge, a chasm that was first created by a prehistoric upheaval. From these slopes, the largest stream of Ararat flows down the Aguri Gulch and joins the famous Arax River.
There is something about Aguri. It gets to you. Maybe because it ties the Armenians to Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark. I'm sure the Turks want to cover up the Armenian connection with Ararat. That's why they arrested us and they threw us in jail. This way they would not let us go to Aguri. For a long time I wondered about the Aguri Gorge. It cuts right into the heart of the mountain. The cliffs are probably twice as high as the Grand Canyon. Somewhere in that mysterious gorge is Jacob's Well. The old village of Aguri got its water there. Now there is a new village where the Kurds live. They call it New Ahura, or New Aguri. But to me, the mystery of old Aguri will always be there.
Aguri is now gone. For 150 years, its origins have remained a mystery. After the Armenians accepted Christianity as the state religion in 301 AD, they built their holy temple of Etchmiadzin in the valley below Ararat. For over 1,000 years thereafter, Armenia stood as a bastion for all of Christendom. In the firm belief that they were the guardians of the Ark, the Armenians discouraged anyone from climbing the mountain. In time, a tradition grew that the mountain was inaccessible, that God did not want mortals to set foot upon it. The first man to break the tradition was a German scientist by the name of Friedrich Parrot. In 1829, he approached the mountain through the bed of the river Arax. At first, the Armenian priests tried to prevent Parrot from attempting to climb Ararat. They told him of a certain Saint Jacob who, after many attempts, had failed to reach the top. Finally, they claimed an angel had given Jacob a piece of the Ark. At the cathedral of Etchmiadzin, Parrot examined the relic. After much delay, a young Armenian monk was assigned as Parrot's guide. He was Khachadur Abovian, who later became famous as the first Armenian novelist. Parrot used the village of Aguri and the chapel of St. James as his base camp, situated at an elevation of 7,000 feet. He secured the services of Kurdish porters. After 2 unsuccessful attempts, finally, on the afternoon of September 27, 1829, Friedrich Parrot and Khachadur Abovian became the first in recorded history to reach the summit of Mount Ararat. Abovian planted on the summit a wooden cross he carried on his back all the way to the top.
I've been studying this book here called Journey to Ararat by Friedrich Parrot. And this book...
Parrot's north slope route is now off limits because it faces the strategic Russian frontier. As the climbers planned their trip, they realized the risk for any Armenian traveling on such a mission. They were well aware of the historic conflict between the Turks and the Armenians. They also knew of the Turkish restrictions on professional 16mm motion picture equipment. So as not to arouse suspicion, they took a couple of amateur still and movie cameras.
All the unexpected problems. Yes, let him arrange all our interior travel. He'll arrange for our guides and the porters. One thing we must do, we must reach that summit. I'm determined, and I know you people are, and we'll sacrifice everything else, but we must reach that summit. It hasn't been done by an Armenian since 1829. It's time.
In preparation for their pilgrimage, they started hiking and climbing in the Catskill Mountains of lower New York State in 1985. they practiced for almost 2 years. The quest for their Armenian roots would lead them through Turkish Anatolia and historical Armenia, through the Taurus Mountains, to Akhtamar, to Van, and finally to Ararat. Dark in history, mysterious in outlook, strange in customs, this was Anatolia, a land the Turks conquered in the 14th century. Scattered in these towns, hundreds of thousands of Armenians had lived before the genocide of 1915. Echoes of memories of these tragic events haunt all Armenians. During the quest to reach the mountaintop, our climbers would also discover a part of themselves here in the ancient homeland. The Taurus Mountains of southeastern Turkey was the starting point of their expedition. On a sunny afternoon in July, our adventurers arrived for a one-week training climb through these rugged mountains.
The Taurus Mountains are a limestone range, a beautiful range. We were in the Taurus Mountains for 7 days. At the peak, around the 12,000-foot level, we ran into a thunderstorm. It was awesome. It was scary. The thunder rocked the entire valley and seemed to echo endlessly. After we had reached the summit, which was approximately 12,000 feet, and began to descend, which was about the 4th day, we ran out of food. And we found a shepherd with a large flock of sheep. We managed to purchase one. Our porters slaughtered the sheep.
And for the next couple of days, the climbers ate grilled lamb and bread they received from their porters. In the evenings, they sat around the fire and watched the guides prepare the bread. In the solitude of these hills, their thoughts were of Ararat and of all the lands in between, once ruled by Armenian kings and princes. Now these 12,000-foot mountains served as a training area to acclimatize them for their rigorous climb of Mount Ararat. After the climbers finished their training, they started on a 500-mile journey to the northeast. The road to Ararat led to Lake Van, the cradle of the Armenian nation. Lake Van has become the holy lake of the Armenians, much as Ararat has become their holy mountain.
I saw the island of Akhtamar with its church rising out of the waters of the vast lake. I thought of Noah's Ark floating on the waters of the great flood. When I reached the island and saw the cathedral with various species of animals carved in its facade, I thought of all the animals in the ark. I guess my mind was consumed by the legends of Mount Ararat.
Akhtamar was constructed in the 10th century, at a time when Armenia served as an outpost of Western civilization. The carvings on the exterior walls extol the Christian faith and depict the history of the Armenian people.
When I gazed up at the dome, I realized it was so similar to the conical shape of Little Ararat. Now I wonder if the Armenian architects 1,000 years ago were inspired by the shape of that mountain.
After the fall of the great capital of Ani in the region of Ararat, the Armenian forefathers fled to this remote island sanctuary. In the graveyard of Akhtamar are burial crosses called khachkars. These carvings, with their distinctive art form, are found only in the areas of Armenian habitation. Masis had finally come back to Van, the birthplace of his father who had spoken so often about Mount Ararat. It was here on the shores of Lake Van, near the ancient citadel, where Moses's father had first dreamed of climbing Ararat.
When I look over these green pastures and think of what was and what could have been here today, here I am, my father's land, as if everyone has deserted me. I think of that saying by an Armenian sage. In a way, it talks about me, and it goes something like this. The ages pass, no tidings come. My brave ones fall, are lost and gone. I never knew until this moment what it felt like, a man to have his sons leave their native land, never to return to their home.
I saw where the old homes and businesses were all knocked down and destroyed. And what really surprised me was when I saw the Armenian writing and crosses along the base of the citadel, and we discovered the old Armenian church. I found myself constantly looking for ties that I had with this ancient homeland. I was looking for Armenian inscriptions, anything that could connect me with this place. My grandfather came from this land. He lived, worked, and treasured this land of Van. He gazed upon the same citadel. I too see it now. His life was molded by this harsh environment. It influenced him deeply. It made him who he was, and maybe who I am.
Children gathered as Moses inspected his father's backyard and home. Chilling thoughts crossed Moses's mind as he recalled stories of how in 1915 his clan had fought hard to defend their homes in Van. His uncle and cousins had died here. He was relieved to find a Kurdish family rather than Turks living in his ancestral home. Moses persuaded them to give him his father's front door knocker. They parted as friends. Inspired by the grandfather's vision to ascend the mountain, the members of the expedition left Van and proceeded to Doru Bayazit, the starting point for Mount Ararat climbing. As they entered the city, Hamlet's thoughts were of his birthplace just a few miles across the frontier.
Since I was a 10 or 11 years old boy, I remember climbing on top of Erebuni's ruins and looking towards Mount Ararat. And I was wondering, why is that mountain that high? And I wanted to find out more about the mountain. I wanted to know why I can't go to the other side of the border, why I can't climb it.
In its massive silence, Ararat casts a spell on everyone who gazes upon her from the valley floor. When Parat first looked at the mountain in 1829, he uttered, "A stupendous work of the Creator, wonderful and overpowering." James Morier, traveling 20 years earlier in the Armenian highlands, writes of Ararat, "Nothing can be more beautiful than its shape, more awesome than its height." Sir Ken Porter traveled through the area in 1817. In his words, "The hugest mountains of the world have been piled upon each other to form this one sublime immensity of earth and rock and snow." Viewed from the northern side, Ararat is the highest protrusion on the globe, a freestanding mountain arising 14,700 feet above the surrounding plain. The summit is 16,945 feet above sea level. The sister mountain, known as Little Ararat or Little Moses, rises to a 13,000-foot elevation. The two summits stand 7 miles apart and come together at a gentle ridge 8,800 feet above sea level. Before the climbers had left New Jersey, they had prepared a copper plaque to commemorate their expedition. They planned to place it on the crest of Ararat. Throughout the climb, they displayed on their garments the Armenian as well as the universal name of the mountain. Massey's, Gregory, and Hamlet started the climb during the afternoon on July 31st, 1986. The trailhead was at 6,000 feet elevation above sea level. Each person carried a 30-pound pack all the way to the very summit. 3 animals transported the bulk of their equipment and supplies as far as the high camp over 14,400 feet. The mountain is divided into 4 climatic zones. From the base to the 6,000-foot elevation is an arid grass slope with very little habitation. When Hamlet began to climb the mountain, he thought of his father's home in Yerevan, Armenia, a scant 10 miles away, yet so far. He had been away from Soviet Armenia for 13 years. All his life he had wanted to climb Ararat, but would not be allowed to do so from across the Russian frontier.
When we were climbing Mount Ararat on a relatively lower slopes, we came across to flower fields. And then, to my surprise, I saw my favorite flowers. These flowers we call in Armenia antaram flowers. So they never dry, they never die. These flowers were a symbol of kind of eternity for us. I remember as a child, we used to hike a lot in Armenia's mountains, and these flowers were my favorite. And this was very surprising for me to see these flowers on Ararat. I thought Ararat had no vegetation at all. But when I came across to these flowers, I naturally picked them up and I put them in my bag. They gave me the spiritual boost that I needed. I felt very happy. And these flowers, to me, are the symbol of eternity.
Many alpine flowers are found on Mount Ararat. The second zone, from 6,000 feet to 11,500 feet, has the best pasture land on the mountain. In this zone, there are bears, wolves, foxes, wild swine, and poisonous snakes. Here we also find nomadic Kurdish tribes with their flocks. The Kurds control the day-to-day access to Ararat and claim the mountain as their own. At times, they have been unfriendly to foreigners who come to climb the mountain. The previous year, Massey's, Gregory, and Hamlet tried to climb Ararat for the first time. They were turned back by a Kurdish rebellion. To a large degree, the Kurds are economically self-sufficient. The men are the shepherds, the women tend the animals and do the household chores, such as milking the goats and sheep, then churning milk to produce butter. These people of Muslim faith are guides and porters on the mountain. Living for long periods at altitudes of 11,000 feet, they have developed strong limbs and large lung capacities. Our climbers established base camp at 10,400 feet elevation near the Kurdish encampment. At this level, they had the convenience of tables and folding chairs carried up by the pack animals. Massey's, Gregory, and Hamlet tried out their skills at the game of backgammon against the Turkish guides and the Kurdish porters. They were surprised to see some of the Kurdish guides and porters wearing American jeans and other clothing. Astronaut James Irwin, during the 1970s search for Noah's Ark, had followed the same route and had given his clothing to the Kurdish mountaineers. But this was the last chance for frivolity. Soon, Massey's was to get very sick from the altitude. The Armenian expedition was accompanied by a Turkish guide and a translator, 2 Kurdish porters, and a cook. They also used the services of a horse, a mule, and a donkey. Our climbers are now in the third zone of the mountain, extending to 14,000 feet. Grass and flowers still grow on the lower portions of this zone, interlaced with shale and stone debris. This is a zone of boulders, some as large as 15 feet across, that come tumbling down the mountain. Goats graze among the porous rocks which absorb the melting snow and eventually carry it underground to the valley below. Ararat, for the most part, is devoid of surface water and trees. The landscape is mostly barren. The only forest is on the eastern slope of Little Ararat.
I was worried about my father. I was always observing him. I knew if something happened on Mount Ararat, there'd be no help. He was breathing hard, and he was going very slowly. I was most worried about my father as we were climbing on the glacier. I really wanted him to make it too. I had the idea that we were a team, and we had to go all the way to the top together.
The rubble is loose and slippery, with hidden sinkholes in the snow. Pillow lava is found on Ararat up to 14,000 feet elevation, possibly an indication that Ararat had been underwater when it erupted as a volcano. The southern slope of Ararat, the route taken by our 3 Armenian climbers, is noted for its uncertain climate. Fog, wind, rain, hail, snow are common occurrences. There are frequent and unexpected thunderstorms and blizzards. High camp was established at 14,400 feet. They spent 2 nights here getting acclimated to the elevation. The guide and translator remained with the climbers. They were sorry to see the Kurdish porters and their animals return to the lower slopes. The thin air and the uncertainty about their Turkish guides left the climbers with the feelings of abandonment, loneliness, and fear. Masis, almost 60 years of age, was very tired and discouraged. He had been stopped by the authorities and the Kurds from climbing the mountain the year before. He was afraid this would be his last chance. He was affected by the bitter cold. His pulse rate had risen to 160. At this high altitude, dizziness and hallucinations are common.
At times like these, one's thoughts go back to one's origins. What we doing up here, this barren land of eternal snow and rock? I thought of my father, born in Van, how he fled to America, a land of opportunity, how my son and I had this crazy notion to make claim to a part of Armenian history. Could it really be that the world was once flooded? Did Noah himself walk down these slopes? What about Agori? Always mysterious, always elusive. The Turkish government had not wanted us to go to Agori. What were they afraid of? Was there electronic equipment there spying on Yerevan and the USSR? Or were they afraid we would find the remains of the Ark? Were they afraid we would find evidence of the destroyed Armenian village? The only village ever on Ararat's slope, and prove Ararat was an Armenian mountain? As we sat in our tent, we wondered, was this really an Armenian mountain?
For reasons that the Turkish government never gave, Masis, Gregory, and Hamlet were not permitted to go to Aguri. But their camera did in the hands of a Kurdish shepherd and found hundreds of Armenian gravestones. It was only a few months before the completion of this film that the Aguri transparencies arrived, an astonishing feat of covert photography a collection of views unknown to the outside world. We find a devastated cemetery on the forbidden northwest slope of Ararat. Some gravestones are hundreds of years old and reddened by a strange moss growing on Ararat. Parat and Hagopian walked in the graveyard among these khachkars. Did the patriarch Noah also walk on this same slope? In 1829, 175 Armenian families lived in Aguri, the only inhabited spot on the mountain. Their livelihood came from breeding animals and growing vineyards and orchards. The tranquil little village was shaken to its foundations at sunset on June 20th, 1840. The earthquake was so tremendous that it shot as an arrow through the Ararat Valley, sending shockwaves southward to Lake Van over 100 miles distant. All inhabitants died. For 150 years, the gravestones have remained as our cameras saw them just a few months ago. This one reads, "From Ornis, a memorial to Christ in the year 949. Noah, Ararat, Aguri. Could it be said that the seeds of Armenia were first planted here? We know only this. The knowledge of the existence of Aguri had unexpectedly brought Masis, Gregory, and Hamlet full circle on the mountain itself in their quest for their roots. On such a mountain, man is a lonely creature. The mountain is ever defending itself. The secrets of Aguri and of Noah's Ark are hidden by the power of earthquakes and the force of sudden daily climatic changes on the mountain.
I was breathing with great difficulty, and the oxygen was very thin here. As I came into the high camp, I was walking at a very slow pace, and I was breathing as deep as I possibly could till my lungs ached. After I arrived in the high camp, I rested for a while, expecting my breathing to resume to normal, but it did not. I continued breathing very hard for the next 3 days as we remained at that higher elevation.
How about the half steps? You couldn't even take full steps. You couldn't even climb at a full step.
Once we started climbing, I realized how difficult it was to climb. But the main thing was we had to get there, we had to climb no matter what. Higher we climbed, more difficult it became climbing. Once we got to the high camp, we realized what it means to climb Mount Ararat. The oxygen is very thin, we all know that. And we all knew before we got to the mountain that it's going to be extremely hard physically. But one thing dominates in our thoughts. You must put all these things away, all these negative thoughts away in order to be able to continue any higher. So we just said, that's it. We have to climb, and regardless what happens, regardless how bad we felt, that didn't matter. Although we couldn't sleep at night, we couldn't rest properly, but it, again, didn't matter.
And the worst problem was the altitude. I had difficulty coping with that thin air. I was pretty good until I reached about 12,000 feet, and then severe headaches set in. And for 3 days after that, I had such a excruciating headache, could hardly stand it. I got nosebleeds, but I had determination. I knew I was going to that summit, and I had to fight that. And no matter how sick I got or how bad I felt, it was overcome only by the fact that I had determination and I knew I was going to get up there.
Up in a high camp, the weather was very bad. It was damp and cold, and we lost our appetite. We had strong headaches, and we just couldn't find the right spot to sit and the right thing to do. We couldn't wait for that one day to go by until our body could get accustomed to that height. Finally, after many hours of suffering, we couldn't even sleep at night. We could hear the wind blowing and the rocks falling, and we constantly had this feeling of loneliness and being unprotected.
At times, winds rise to over 100 miles per hour, sending down gigantic boulders. Temperatures at night can go down to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
I can remember the night before we went to the summit when Gregory and I were in our tent. It just had gotten dark. We just went to sleep. I felt so bad physically that I honestly did not expect to wake up in the morning. But I couldn't let on. I couldn't let Gregory get down on the trip. So I mentioned to Gregory, I said, Gregory, tomorrow morning, our lifetime dreams are going to come true. Tomorrow morning, we will be on that summit. And then I said to myself, if I wake up in the morning.
They did get up in the morning before dawn. From high camp at over 14,000 feet to the top was still another 2,500 feet. The climbers roped themselves together. The slope was over 45 degrees. Each person still carried about 30 pounds in his backpack. This is the zone of glaciers and perpetual snow, where avalanches are commonplace. There are 12 glaciers on Ararat moving downward at the rate of about a meter per year. By this reckoning, if Noah's Ark rested on the summit, it should have arrived to the lower edge of the glacier 700 years before Christ was born, about the time Armenians established nationhood around the base of Ararat. They emerged through the clouds and arrived on the top at 11:30 a.m. on August 4th, 1986.
I saw the summit in the distance. I was walking very, very slowly, and I was walking in half steps. All of a sudden, I felt an emotional release, and I felt my eyes getting wet, and the tears started coming out, and I was crying tears of joy, and I started uttering the words, 2 years, 2 years. And I turned back and I could see Moses and Hamlet behind me. So I waited there, and when we all were together, we linked arms, and we literally marched right to the top with a sudden burst of energy. After I was on top, though, I felt sad. Perhaps because I had to leave soon. Perhaps because it's over. And now it's finished. I felt sad. I felt empty.
When I reached the summit, I cried. I felt all emotion just drain out of me. I felt very relaxed. I felt satisfied that I was standing on the highest point of Ararat. I was standing there not alone, but I was standing there with thousands of people living today. My forefathers, they were all with me.
Well, we went up Mount Ararat because we wanted to take this copper plaque to the summit. We wanted to bury it in the glacier so that in several centuries that plaque will emerge from the edge of the glacier, and this would be evidence that Armenians returned to Mount Ararat.
They remained for 45 minutes on top of a foreign land, a bare 10 miles from present-day Armenia. They were the first Armenians in history to lead a successful expedition to the summit of Mount Ararat. A father and a son born in the United States and a former tumbling champion of the USSR born in Yerevan, Armenia. After the two guides started downhill, Gregory hurriedly began to dig into the glacier. He did not want to be caught burying the plaque. Hamlet kept the two Turks occupied just out of sight as Massis dug up the plaque and buried it again much deeper. He was afraid the guides might return and find it. Hamlet also had reached his dream of standing atop Ararat, but smog obscured his view of his native city.
I looked towards Soviet Armenia, and I could see the Ararat Plain right down under Mount Ararat. When we looked back south, we could see as far as Lake Van. All these territories were historical Armenian lands. But today, unfortunately, they are all badly divided. And just standing on the top of that mountain, you can't accept that fact. But it is not divided in our hearts. And the Armenian people always lived with the hope of seeing that Armenia to be united one day.
Man stands alone as if on an isolated island rising above the blanket of clouds. Below lies a wilderness of mountains. On a clear, cloudless day, you can see the infant Euphrates and, possibly, the site of the Garden of Eden. Over the top of Little Ararat, you can see Persia, where Armenians fought the first battle for religious freedom. After defeat in Italy, Hannibal went through this passageway of empires. Below the cover of cloud and smog is the ruined city of Artaxata, built by Hannibal, once the rich and mighty capital of Armenia. When H.F.B. Lynch, the renowned British historian, reached the snowy peak, he thought of Noah standing on the same pinnacle with boundless hope filling his eyes. A world lay before the patriarch, a world to be populated, a land to be settled, villages to be built. Thoughts and passions, reality and visions mingle as one stands alone on a timeless pinnacle above a vast plateau where his ancestors once lived. The whole expanse of Armenian history passing and vanishing, and then loneliness again. Far below lies a homeland, the countless homes of countless poets, teachers, and artists. Below the howling winds, a land still lives. In the warm autumn air, the birds still fly. And from afar, the swallows cross the quickening earth to seek in ancient Armenia the villages of their birth. Through timeless memory and endless ages, Ararat beckons. She beckons her flocks, her children, her guardians.